about Senator White?
We were scheduled to do pensions all day today.
Yeah. And Monday.
And Monday, yes.
Well, you.
Oh, no, not today. Not today. We weren't. Just
Monday.
Monday. That's right. Yeah.
You have a reprieve.
Well, I wish we didn't, because we have to get that report out.
So
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure you realize that we are now live streaming on YouTube.
I did not realize that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you
Well, it
so
came
much,
across my screen.
Senator Collmore.
Yep, it came across
More
my
than
screen.
once you've saved me. All right, so here we are. It is, I believe it is Friday, November 19th. And this is Senate Government Operations Committee. And I'm going to do some introductions here because some of you aren't familiar with all of us on the committee. So I'm going to introduce the committee and then I'll make a few comments. So I'm Jeanette White and I'm from Windham County. Anthony, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm Anthony Polina from Washington County.
Brian Collmore from Rutland County.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Aisha Rum, Hinsdale, Chittenden County.
So, and we have with us Representative Gannon, who is sitting in with us because whatever we do today, and then we do on the floor on Monday, the House will then be taking it up, and he is co-chair of House Government Operations, so is sitting in with us to get a flavor of what's going on and what we're doing. So, and we also have with us, of course, Tucker Anderson, our faithful drafter, who has been spinning his wheels over the last day or so. And we have Carl Etnier from East Montpelier, Peter Elwell from Brattleboro, and we have Kendall Smith and Jay Johnson from the governor's office. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Just Jeanette, a piece
Yes.
of Zoom housekeeping. We cannot really see your face. So,
there is nothing I can do about that.
Okay.
The way this room is set up, this is my office room. The lighting in here is really terrible. You can just pretend like I'm in witness protection. There's nothing I can do about it.
okay.
Because it has this funky camera on, it's not in the computer, it's on the top of the computer. And if you move it too much, it falls over. And okay.
Got it.
Besides, nobody cares what I look like. That's not the point here. So.
Jeanette,
okay,
maybe if you changed your name to Senator Jeanette White, it might just help people.
I don't know how to, let's see.
Okay. It's okay if not. I just thought maybe that would sort of even things out. Help me to see you clearly.
We can't see you, but we know who she is. So you mean that?
Yeah.
Better? Okay, great, thanks. Good suggestion. So speaking of Zoom, I'm gonna set a couple rules here. We will conduct this as we do when we're in the committee room so that the committee members will ask questions and speak, and other people will have their turn to speak and ask questions later, but it is the committee that is doing the deliberations here. We do not use chat. Chat, in my opinion, is, and I make this rule because I'm the chair, and so I decided that I could. Chat is like having a side conversation, and if we were in the room, we would not let you be sitting there having a side conversation. So we do not use chat. The only time we would use chat is if somebody gives a reference to somebody or something or a link to something, Gail might put it up on the chat so that people can see us. And I see we're also being joined by Representative Copeland Hanses, who is the chair of the House Government Operations Committee and is here for the same reasons that Representative Gannon is. so we don't use chat. And I would ask that we conduct this as we would in a committee room, that we not be corresponding with people outside of this room, that we are in the room and we are talking to each other and not corresponding with or getting messages from people outside of the room. It detracts from the proceedings, and I think that it lessens the importance of us as committee members. So are there any comments on any of that? Thank you. So what I'm going to do is going to define what I think we're doing here, and then I'm going to ask the governor's office to just tell us what their interest was and why they think we're here. And then we'll have Tucker go through the bill, and then we'll have questions of Tucker, and then we'll hear from the witnesses. Make sense? Okay, thank you. And you can see that Senator Collmore likes to do a thumbs up because some people nod their heads a lot. And I was in a staff meeting yesterday where the question had a yes or no answer, and somebody was going, yes and no, yes and no. So anyway, so we have been asked by the governor's office and by towns out there to allow them to consider discussing and potentially adopting mask mandates for their towns only. That's what we're dealing with today. This is a very, very, very narrow topic. We are not addressing the virus itself. We are not addressing public health issues. We're not addressing, I've had requests from microbiologists, endocrinologists, mask opponents, mask proponents, public health people, vaccine opponents and proponents to make this a much broader issue. And I have said, no, this is a very, very narrow thing that we're doing. We're looking at asking us to give permission to towns to do what they think is right. It is permissive only. It is not requiring anybody to do anything. So that's where we are. And I would ask that we keep our conversations to that narrow topic. So any questions?
I mean, I think just a heads up, I did try to talk to Senator Lyons about the public health concerns as well. I just want to say it's hard for me personally to limit this to solely what towns can do. I know that's our jurisdiction as a committee, but we all have broader jurisdictions as senators. We all have a commitment to our constituents as senators that I think requires that we really dig in to this issue and also look at what it means to have a patchwork of proposals from different towns from a public policy and public health perspective. So I still feel like we need to ask critical questions, not just talk about whether this is properly permissive or not.
Well, I think, and there are many issues there that we need to address, and most of them will be addressed in January when we come back and we have multi-jurisdictions, multi-committees dealing with it and asking the really hard questions, and when we can give it appropriate time and consideration and hear from all of those people. So I think that we have already committed, I think the Pro Tem has already committed to having us have those discussions in January. So, so with that, I would like to ask the governor's office, and I don't know which of you wants to go first, or so Kendall, I see you're unmuted.
Sure, great. Thank you, Chair White, and thank you to the committee. I thought what I would do was basically give some opening remarks. Jay Johnson, the governor's legal counsel, is here with me, and then we could take questions, and both of those will take them as they arise, or depending on what they are. For the record, my name is Kendall Smith. I'm Governor Scott's Director of Policy Development and Legislative Affairs. And yes, we thought it might be helpful to the committee to offer the administration and the governor's perspective of why and how we got here. Over the past few months, we've gotten several calls from legislators, legislative leadership, as well as Vermonters, that some feel more needs to be done right now since we lifted the state of emergency to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, especially in relation to the Delta variant, and especially when it comes to mask wearing. And I want to be very clear, I think the committee knows this, I think everyone here has heard this, the governor does support voluntary masking. Every week, he still has press conferences, and the administration's guidance at those press conferences is strongly urging Vermonters to wear masks when they're indoor and when they're in public spaces. However, where the governor has been clear, and what he often shares at those press conferences as well, is he does not believe a statewide mask mandate at this time is warranted, or will create the desired outcomes that folks are hoping for. What the governor and the administration continue to point back to is that the best thing Vermonters and we all can be doing to protect ourselves, each other, and our most vulnerable is to get vaccinated and to get your booster shots. So again, I want to underscore that we'd love to also be having a conversation, not through legislation, but how we can be working together to encourage Vermonters and constituents, again, to get vaccinated and get boosters. However, last week, VLCT, Karen, I know, is here and participating, had made statements in the press that really resonated with the governor as a potential compromise or middle ground, where it would be helpful if the authority could be granted to municipalities to pass local mask mandates if a municipality wanted to. The governor thought that approach, based on local control and absence of a statewide emergency, was a middle ground that he could support. Chair White, you already laid that out pretty well, so I won't reiterate that. And we did share with the committee the letter that details the governor's thinking that he approached the speaker and the pro tem with, and I think that's been publicized pretty well through the press as well. So in that compromise, Jay had put together some draft language, and I know Tucker from the Ledge Council did as well, that would basically be a narrowly crafted bill, again, to allow but not require municipalities to have votes to require masking in public spaces within their jurisdiction. That's kind of the 10,000 foot overview. Jay, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add at this time or on the governor's approach that you think I may have missed.
Thanks, Kendall, and thank you, Chair White and the committee for having us here today. I just wanted to briefly touch on a little bit of the history of the governor's EOs in this area. For a long time, early in the pandemic, we were strongly encouraging mask wearing. That changed. So that changed in May of 2020 when we, under the governor's emergency powers, authorized municipalities to expand, to have expanded authority on masking. So municipalities have had this authority in the past. That remained true through August of 2020 when the governor's statewide masking mandate became effective. That was loosened slightly with respect to outdoor activities in April of 2021. And then effective May 15th, the governor's mask mandate was lifted for fully vaccinated people. The local authority at that time remained in place. And then the emergency declaration ended by its terms. They were renewable every 30 days for the entire period of the emergency. And that was June 15, 2021. And many of the towns that had chosen to do mask mandates, their authority ended, but many of those towns, by the terms of their own orders, tied it to the emergency declaration, and they expired naturally. So that's a little bit of where we have been. Towns have had this authority in the past, and that was pursuant to the emergency powers of the governor. And at this point, we felt that it was appropriate to use, if this was something that the legislature really was serious about doing, that and towns felt that they needed, that we could use this democratic process to accomplish that.
Thank you, thank you. Senator Rom Hinsdale?
Thank you, Senator White. So at the, as I recall, the governor vetoed or put a stop to a process for Brattleboro to enact its own mask policy and expressed concern about a patchwork of policies that was town by town. Can you say more about what his thinking was at the time and how that's changed?
Sure. So yes, you're right. It was Brattleboro and I believe East Montpelier, Jay, chime in if I have the municipality wrong, that did approach the administration earlier this year about doing a local mask mandate. And it goes back to the fact that the governor, just to be clear, does not think, again, that the mask mandate is warranted or is going to get the outcomes that we're hoping for. So he wasn't willing to sign off on it. However, if a select board or a local body, again, keeping local control in mind, does want to pursue that path, especially, again, hearing from VLCT that it's something that it seems like a lot are asking for. He's decided that he can live with that middle ground or that compromise. Jay, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
I guess the only thing that I would add is that authority is pursuant to Title 18 in the health law. It still requires the Commissioner of Health's approval of each of those actions. The governor, by his general emergency powers, has made a determination that policy determinations or policy changes regarding COVID posture would rest with the governor. So to the extent, like Kendall said, the governor does not support a statewide mandate at this point. There is no emergency throughout the state. And to the extent that this is done case by towns, each town will need to have a rational basis to do so legally. And I think that we are not in a position at this time, and the commissioner is not, and the governor certainly is not, to make a determination about whether the health conditions on the ground warrant this kind of exercise of authority. Each town is going to have to be responsible for making those determinations under this authority.
Thank you, Senator Hinsdale.
So it's my understanding that the CDC recommends where there is high or substantial transmission in a county that they do put an indoor masking policy into effect. Does the governor disagree with the CDC?
The governor supports masking mandate and stands behind the CDC recommendations, and that's what they are. That's what we are doing. Our policy mirrors the CDC policy. The governor's policy is to strongly urge Vermonters to wear masks indoors, regardless of vaccination status. The CDC policy, I think, actually is not as restrictive, and it is not a mandate.
Okay, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks. So, Jay, your reading of the CDC guidelines are as recommendations rather than as requirements?
Yes. I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong. I don't know if Tucker has looked at that, but I do not believe the CDC recommendations are requirements.
And yet they do reflect best science. I mean, we are looking to the CDC as our scientific, setting scientific standards that we would want to be doing. And so you're feeling that the governor, by recommending masking, is reflecting the CDC's recommendation, solely recommending that we mask in hotspots or everywhere. I think everywhere as well.
I don't want us to get too far into the weeds on this, because this really is something that the towns remember, we are dealing with a very, very, very narrow bill here, very narrow. What I believe that the questions around what the CDC recommends and how to implement that is an issue for Health and Welfare Committee.
Right.
But I don't mean to squelch conversation. but we have before us a very narrow bill here that is permissive for towns. And that's the issue that we're dealing with.
And I still like, I feel we have a responsibility to the public to make sure accurate information is out there. So I'd just like to read, if I may, quickly from the CDC website, because I don't want this conversation to yield some kind of misinformation to the public.
Okay.
On July 27th, 2021, CDC released updated guidance on the need for urgently increasing COVID-19 vaccination coverage and a recommendation for everyone in areas of substantial or high transmission to wear a mask in public indoor places, even if they are fully vaccinated.
And I believe I believe that is what Jay said, that it's a recommendation. It isn't a mandate, it's a recommendation.
And the governor's policy is not inconsistent.
He agrees with the
Governor?
recommendation. What he does not agree with is the mandate.
So I would ask that we move on to the actual bill itself. Thank you very much. Yes, Senator Clarkson.
And I would just remind us that we are not in session. We do not actually have possession of this bill. Just as we go forward, I just want to remind us of that fact that our Secretary of the Senate has reminded us that we are not in session, we are not in possession of this bill. And in fact, we will be voting on this bill on the floor, but we may not need to be taking a vote here.
I don't understand at all what you said. We need to get it out of this committee if it's going to go to the floor. Okay, if that's not true, then I can be corrected, but we can talk about the procedure afterward. I want to talk now with the people who are here to talk about the bill itself. Okay. So thank you, Jay and Kendall, and you're certainly welcome to stay with us for, I know you have nothing else to do, so we'd love to have you stay. So,
Thank you, Chair White.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
and Tucker, if you would walk us through the bill, and I think everybody should have a copy of the bill. The bill has been posted. And so if we can go there, and it is Tucker, take it away.
Good morning. For the record, Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. As the chair indicated, the draft is posted on the committee information page. We will be working off of draft 4.1. The request number here at the top is 21-1038. So if we are all on the same page, there is one operative section in this bill. It delegates a temporary authority to municipalities to adopt face covering rules. And there are some details within that we will walk through. And as we move along, I'll highlight some of the subsections that target specific procedural requirements for the adoption of rules that will be changed within this temporary framework. I will start in section 1 on page 2. Subsection A, the draft starts by defining municipality for purposes of this power. The municipalities that will be able to adopt these rules will be a city, town, or incorporated village.
Any questions on that? Because municipality in general can mean fire districts, water districts, a whole lot of other things. So for this purpose, it is only cities, towns, or incorporated villages.
I just want to be clear. I got lost for a second. We're talking about draft 4.1, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay, Tucker.
Moving along to subsection B, which contains the delegation of the authority to the municipalities. The opening clause states that this is for the purpose of COVID-19 prevention and mitigation. The legislative body of a municipality shall have the authority to adopt a temporary rule requiring individuals to wear face coverings while indoors at locations that are open to the public. Within this delegation of authority to the municipalities, you may see some further definition at the municipal level of some of these undefined terms, which would include face coverings, indoors, and locations that are open to the public. Subsection goes on to state that a rule adopted pursuant to this section shall not apply to school buildings or school property, which shall remain under the authority of the school board. So that part of subsection B sets aside the school districts as separate municipal corporations, and the legislative bodies of those districts will have control over face covering rules for those buildings and property. In subsection C, the draft starts by stating that the legislative body of the municipality shall adopt these rules at a regular or special meeting of the legislative body that is warned for that purpose. Subdivision goes on to notwithstand 24 VSA sections 1972 and 1973, or municipal charters to the contrary, and states that a rule adopted pursuant to this authority shall take effect upon adoption and shall not be subject to a petition for permissive referendum. I will pause here to note that section 1972 and 1973 are the general procedures that are applicable to the adoption of municipal ordinances. These rules will be styled as ordinances and will be subject to these procedures. In section 1972, under general law, there are required procedures first for notice and then for the period of effectiveness. When an ordinance is adopted at the local level under general law, there is a 60-day period before the ordinance is effective. So the first part of this is waiving that 60-day period and saying these rules will be effective upon adoption. A component of 1972 that is not withstood here and that will remain effective is that within the 14-day period after an ordinance is adopted, the municipality is required to publish the full text of the ordinance in a newspaper of general circulation and in designated locations within the municipality. Section 19.
Yep, yes, please.
So I just want to make sure I understand when Brattleboro put an ordinance together and they were going to have to wait 60 days before.
I believe they did not put an ordinance. That's why we're using the term rule instead of ordinance.
So what have they proposed before? Would that have taken 60 days?
Well, can we wait and have Peter maybe talk about their process before and or Peter, you can answer that right now, I guess.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. In August, we styled it as a resolution that was adopting a rule rather than as an ordinance, because we understood that to be the proper terminology to use under Title 18. We recognized that the Commissioner of Health had the authority, that we didn't have independent authority as a municipality under state law to take the action. And that under Title 18, the select board could take the action in the first instance, but then it wouldn't become effective until it had been approved by the Commissioner of Health. So that's the route that we traveled. We learned in the following exchange of emails with the governor's office that for the purposes of COVID regulations, the governor had assumed authority over what otherwise would have been exercised by the Commissioner of Health under Title 18. But our understanding is that it was still sort of the proper route. It was just a different individual making the final decision on behalf of the state. And so we didn't then, and it is our understanding about what's intended now, although that's obviously subject to the work that you're doing right now. we didn't understand then, and we don't believe now, that the purpose is to limit the form of this to ordinances, because of the fact that, in fact, Title 18, talking about public health rulemaking at the local level, speaks to the establishment of rules. I certainly would defer to Tucker if I'm misunderstanding any of that, and to you when you have made decisions about how to proceed.
Yes, and I think that's right, and Tucker can respond to that, but that is the reason that word rule is used as opposed to either resolution or ordinance. The rule Tucker can tell us what a rule allows. I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to have the 60-day waiting period. And he'll walk us through that.
So the big difference now is it doesn't require the governor or the health commissioner to sign off on it. That's the big difference. Well, what we're doing here is giving permission with the governor's approval. We're giving permission to towns to adopt rules without having to go to the governor for permission. And we're not using the term ordinance because that would require 60 days to become effective, in addition to a lot of noticing and publishing. So we're using the term rule, and Tucker can, but that's really what all we're doing here is giving the towns permission, and with the governor's approval that they do not have to go to him for permission. Yes, Senator Clarkson.
So while we may be doing something that strictly adheres to permitting towns to do this, we are, by moving from an ordinance to a rule, we're enabling towns to do this much faster. And as we know, a lot of our bigger towns are wanting to do this before the holidays. So if our objective is to save lives, we are saving, hopefully we'll save more lives by getting a rule done so that towns can turn this around within a week if they want, if they're able, and that we can be masked and saving lives in our biggest towns almost immediately, both for both major holidays and for all the holiday party happenings, that, you know, all the events that'll happen around the holiday. So this speeds up what we hope will save lives, is my very basic understanding of this.
So if I can add one more thing here before Tucker, you jump in. An ordinance allows for, in addition to requiring the 60 days before adoption, an ordinance allows you to impose either civil or criminal enforcement penalties. A resolution does not allow you to have any enforcement powers. A rule allows you to have enforcement powers if you so choose. So if East Montpelier decides that they're going to fine everybody who doesn't wear a mask $150, they can do that under a rule. If Brattleboro decides that they're not going to impose any enforcement because it's just too complicated and hard to do, they don't have to do it. A rule allows you the flexibility to either adopt enforcement proceedings or not. So Tucker, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that has been pounded into my head by you for 2 days now.
The terminology that is used here gets very confusing and often conflated. And the term rule that is being borrowed from Title 18 expressly recognizes that it includes ordinances. If you go through 18 VSA section 613, it acknowledges in subsection C that these are rules or ordinances that may be adopted pursuant to that authority. As general categories, I think it's useful to break this out into ordinances, which are an exercise of the police power of the municipality and may include civil or criminal penalties and enforcement, from resolutions. It sounds like Brattleboro pursued a resolution which is advisory or directory and does not include enforcement provisions. To give you an example of what the statutes contemplate resolutions being used for, when the select board finds that they have some project they need money for, they will resolve that the municipality needs to incur some debt to fund that, and then they will go through the indebtedness process. It's as if the legislative body of the municipality is speaking without having any enforcement or decision power around what they're doing. They're moving forward some other process. And you can also think about your own resolutions and how it's an act of the General Assembly speaking in a way without enacting something that is enforceable. Very similar. The term rule is being used in this draft, and it will permit, according to its own terms, a municipality to adopt an ordinance, which is enforceable, and under general law does require procedures before it is effective. So jumping back into that subdivision C2, the first part sets aside that timeline and those procedures and says that an ordinance that is adopted here under this rule authority will be effective immediately. It will still need to be posted and published, so the public will get a full copy of that ordinance in the papers and in those designated public places in the municipality. The meeting that the legislative body will hold will still have to be warned for the regular special meeting where they're adopting this. So there will be notice under the open meeting law that is publicized in some way. And then the other component of C2 that I just started to dip into before we talked about rules, resolutions, and ordinances was section 1973. Under general law, ordinances are subject to permissive referenda. 5% of the voters of a municipality can bring a petition to the legislative body within 45 days after the adoption of an ordinance. And as long as the signatures are right on the paper, the legislative body then has 60 days, I believe, to hold a townwide vote to determine whether the ordinance is going to be repealed or whether it's going to be effective. Subdivision C2 sets that aside and says that during this temporary period, if a legislative body is going to adopt one of these face covering rules in the style of an ordinance and have that enforcement authority, there will be no permissive referenda process. It is setting that aside. Moving along to subsection D, which is at the bottom of page 2. Subsection D requires the legislative body of the municipality to meet at minimum once every 30 days to reconsider any rule adopted pursuant to this authority. At the meeting, the legislative body is required, shall vote to either rescind or extend the rule for the ensuing 30-day period. So once every 30 days, they'll meet, they'll vote and determine whether the face covering rule is going to remain in effect for the ensuing 30 days from that meeting. Final subsection here, subsection E, is the sunset. The authority granted by this section shall expire on April 30th, 2022, and any municipal rule that is in effect on that date shall be repealed. So April 30th, 2022 is the last date that this authority is available to the municipalities, and it is also the date that any rule that has been adopted will vanish and no longer be enforceable.
So that is the simple bill. And are there any questions for Tucker right now? Yes, Senator Calmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, everybody. I assume since this is 4.1, there were other iterations of this. I just had a couple of questions. In section 1, subsection B, and perhaps you've already addressed this, Tucker, and if you did, I apologize. I tried to pay very close attention. It says requiring individuals. Is it going to be up to the municipality to decide age appropriate situation? And what about people who have trouble breathing while wearing a facial covering? Are there carve-outs or exemptions for those folks? Or is that going to be up to each individual municipality?
That is going to be up to the municipality when they adopt the rule. So the delegation here, the canal that this is going to fit in, is going to be, they may require individuals to wear face coverings and there may be further definition there, while indoors, so that's one of the canals, at locations that are open to the public, and that could be more narrowly defined by the municipalities.
Thank you.
I did want to note before I finish the walkthrough that an interesting question came up that I wanted to relay to all of you for your consideration as you move through this, about the application potentially of a municipal rule to state facilities and state buildings. So I wanted you to think about that. I have not had time to research what the application of a municipal ordinance could be to a state building, but it may be something that you want to consider as you move towards Monday.
Thank
I
you.
just
That
had
is
one additional question. I know that the town or municipality is going to have to warn the meeting at which the vote takes place. Is that also going to be true for the future meetings every 30 days?
Yes, and if it's at a regular meeting, then those meeting times and dates are determined by either some municipal ordinance or policy that sets out when the legislative body holds their regular meetings. If it's a special meeting, then it has to be warned in advance with a posted agenda.
Thank you, Tucker.
Senator Clarkson.
Speaking of warnings, Tucker, a normal warning takes 7 days, is that right?
So it depends completely on the context and what is happening. There are different warning procedures for
Right.
elections and when the voters are involved, which I think is what you're touching upon. And then there are subject matters that require additional warning periods. So for example, charter adoption has an extended warning period. Here, this is likely going to fall under ordinary warnings for these legislative body meetings under the open meeting law. If it's a special meeting, it has to be publicly announced 24 hours before that meeting is held. And that requires publication through newspapers of general circulation, broadcasts, including radio and television. It has to get sent out as a press release to all of those media outlets, as well as, and this is an important component of what legislative bodies have to do to warn their meetings, any person or entity that has requested within, let's say, that calendar year to be directly notified of any special meetings that are going to be held.
Right. So I guess the point I'd like to underscore here is that this further enables a call for a special town meeting or select board meeting or trustee meeting that could be done within 24 hours if done correctly, and then voted on and immediately put into play. So we are really speeding up the process with which a town could protect its population. Is that my understanding?
Yes, provided that the legislative body of that municipality already has text and material that they can work with. Otherwise, the legislative body is going to have to hold a meeting likely to discuss what they're going to pursue and then develop the rule, and then likely have a warned special meeting specifically because this calls for it for the adoption of the rule. But yes, when they're ready to move to the adoption phase, it could be a 24-hour period beforehand.
I understand that, I think this is right, that some towns have already put it on their agendas. I mean, their regular select board meetings are warned in the usual way, and they just added it to their agendas for their next meetings. So they don't have to do a special warning for the discussion. And so. Okay, any more questions for Tucker? Okay, thank you, Tucker. And thank you for your patience. And Anthony is right there. This is draft 4.1, which means that Tucker has been busy doing drafts for the last couple of days. And really the concept of permissiveness, just to address all of those other drafts, the concept of permissiveness for the towns to make this decision has not changed throughout the drafts. That was always part of it. But there were questions around, we originally had rules, ordinance or resolution. And as you can tell by Tucker's explanation, we landed on rule. So those were the kinds of changes. Some of it was originally we didn't have in there for the purpose of COVID-19. And we put that in there specifically to make sure that it addressed this situation, not any other situation. So those were the kinds of draft changes that were in here. They had nothing to do with whether we should allow the towns to proceed or not. So Senator Hinsdale?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess while Tucker is still sort of here and available, I wanted to say out loud that I think it should include all buildings in the community, including state buildings. I think it's really challenging if you have a large state building in a community where people aren't following the same requirements. So I think that's really important. And while Tucker's here with Jay and Kendall, I just want to make sure we're not hamstringing towns around the 30-day piece. It just seems challenging sometimes to get people together within 30 days, and municipalities have their own limitations and constraints, and I would like to understand what those might be, and if Jay and Kendall know if the governor has flexibility to make sure we're operating in good faith with our communities, that they can consider this once a month, or I don't know that I even agree with that consideration. I think a 3 to 4 month period of time is fairly short. But I'd really like to hear from them more about that and what it means to them that there's a good faith effort in the towns to try and check in with their community when things evolve.
Great, thanks. I think I'm going to break that into two questions here and ask us to address the 30-day one first, since Jay and Kendall are here, and also we'll hear from the VLCT and the two towns around the 30-day issue. But right now, let's hear from the governor's office about that. And then we'll tackle the state buildings question later instead of mixing them together. Is that okay, Senator Hinsdale?
And Senator White, if you'd be kind enough to add to that, we have a town like Montpelier has federal buildings too. State and federal discussion, I think, what needs to be for both. I think you're right. We can't do it building by building. It's bad enough that we're doing this town by town and not statewide. So building by building seems ludicrous.
Yeah. Okay. So Kendall or Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about the 30-day? And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move then to letting our witnesses actually give us their testimony before we keep jumping back and forth. But so if you want to address that 30-day question, that would be great. Thank you.
I guess I would have two perspectives on it. One is legally, and I don't advise cities and towns, but what I do know is that there should probably be a solid health rationale for doing this. And because it really is for COVID mitigation purposes, the data is changing all the time. And I think towns need to recognize that that their authority rests on this idea of a rational basis. So that's one thing. The other is, I think the governor always extended only for 30 days with the notion that this is the kind of government action that we should be cautious of exercising. That's another point to be made. I think that ties in with the rational basis for exercising it. And further, he was always very conscious of giving Vermonters some kind of hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is something that we're working for. We want to encourage, as Kendall noted, vaccinations and boosters. And we don't want to send mixed messages about whether they work. So I think that towns need to be considering all of those things. I mean, I would, if I were advising a town, But to the extent that there's some hopefulness attached to that, I think that that has been our view is important to many Vermonters.
Kendall, do you want to?
There's nothing more I would add to what Jay just said. The only thing I just underscore is the changing conditions as we, with the governor and Commissioner Pichek and Dr. Levine, members of the administration, monitor the numbers on a daily basis. And some days it spikes in towns in northern Vermont, and some days it spikes in towns in southern Vermont. So to the extent the ground conditions do evolve, having that regular renewal period is a reason to take that health rationale that Jay was talking about into consideration.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Sure.
So I don't know if you have an example of it, but I take it the commissioner communicates with someone in each town, either daily or when there is an update about a surge in cases in their community?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't understand. I don't understand your question. Are you asking me whether the commissioner would have to communicate with each town who does this?
I'm asking if you are keeping in touch with towns daily or regularly to help them understand if there's a surge in cases in their community and in their county.
Every single town, every day? No, but we do have weekly press conferences, one at which the Commissioner of Financial Regulation is presenting the data weekly to Vermonters. DFR keeps that information posted on its website. The Department of Health has town by town data. So, I mean, there is data feeding into the state. So we do have a sense of where the cases are, where the outbreaks are, where the incidents are. So there is but we are not reaching out to every single select board every day to communicate that. It would really be incumbent on the select boards to be keeping an eye on that data.
Okay, I'm on your website right now and I'm looking for, I mean, if you go to the CDC website, it'll say, find my county, it'll say transmission is high, you should wear a mask. Mm-hmm. If you go to your website, I'm looking around for town and county information. Where are people finding it? Where would a town go every day to look for that?
I have no idea what you're looking at, but I'm sure that you can talk to somebody.
Healthvermont.gov website.
I'm sure you can talk to somebody in the Department of Health who can walk you through how to find that information on their website.
And I do think that I know, for example, that Rutland was a hotspot one day last week, and the commissioner was out there in Rutland talking to them. So when we can find that information, but towns are aware. I know that Brattleboro is aware when there's a spike here. I don't know how they get that information, but we can suss that out so that we know. Okay, and that'll help towns feel that they have a handle on it. So,
thank you, Chair White.
So can we go to our witnesses who've been sitting here very, very patiently and hear from them? I think we'll start with, let's start with the towns, and then Karen can kind of wrap up from a statewide entity perspective. Does that make sense? Now, Peter or Carl, do either of you have any time constraints? Okay, so Peter, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. Good morning again to everyone. I think I'll start before I offer a few observations about the draft bill and my perspective and Brattleboro's perspective. I hope will be helpful to you in making your decisions. I'll start by just speaking to the question that Senator Rom Hinsdale asked and the answer that she received from the governor's staff. Our experience, and I can only speak from our experience, I don't know if it's the sort of standard across the state, has been that Commissioner Levine and other officials at the health department have been very effective in communicating with us about particular instances of something unusual happening. So we appreciate that. And I think there's been really good collaboration in that way. We've had that happen both in regard to just sort of general spiking numbers and in regard to specific circumstances in for instance, congregate living facilities. So I think health department communication with municipalities, if it's reflected in Brattleboro's experience, has been good. Counterpoint to that is what you just experienced personally right here in this meeting. We've had some difficulty gaining access to just good, reliable, ongoing, updated data. We've had some communication with the health department about that and find that there are some good resources. If you're looking at county-wide numbers, it's a lot harder to look at municipal numbers. We've decided partway through that it just didn't matter to us to push harder on that point because a couple of different reasons. Number one, just something that's true for all of us is people moving in and out of our communities on a daily basis who aren't part of the population there. So looking at regional numbers makes some sense as opposed to the individual municipal numbers anyway. Particularly for Brattleboro and the other larger towns, we recognize ourselves as the hubs of activity in our area where within Windham County we have a particular concentration of people from outside Brattleboro every day. And so anyway, that's how we've experienced the data.
That's me.
I'm sorry?
I said, that's me.
Right, and the relationship with the health department. On the question that's before you, first of all, we really appreciate that the governor has made a move towards allowing these decisions to be made locally, and appreciate the time and energy that you as a committee and the other senators will be investing in looking at the details of how to move this forward. I'm going to say just once and briefly something that isn't on point to making sure that the bill is the best bill that it can be, and just say that to the point that some of you have already made, that a consistent statewide policy would be helpful. I want to suggest that part of the reason why we feel so strongly, or I personally feel so strongly, and officials in Brattleboro feel strongly about this, is to create consistency within our community. And we do believe that principle, I do believe that principle extends out beyond municipal borders, and it would be helpful to have a consistent policy statewide. But we recognize that the decision has been made that's not appropriate. At least the governor is choosing not to exercise authority to make that happen. And I respect that decision. I think so much about the challenges we've faced in COVID have been that there's no precedent for these things. And we're having to make judgment calls about what is right and feels right for the folks that we serve. So given that the landscape in Vermont is we're not going to have a statewide mask mandate, I feel it's especially important that you are giving this consideration to allowing municipalities to take this action within our own borders, so that at least in those places that choose to take this action, there can be a consistent message and a consistent expectation of people behaving in a way that protects themselves and protects each other. On that, I want to note something for the record that it may be important in terms of how I'm speaking and stumbling a little bit from time to time about speaking for Brattleboro versus speaking for myself. So we, in the August action, didn't have a unanimous vote of our select board. And I think it's important for me to note that. I'm trying to speak carefully to recognize that even within our own community, there are differences of opinion around what is the right calibration of government action on this matter. But it was a 4-1 vote. The select board as a body certainly felt it was important to renew a mandate that I will say back in May of 2020, it was a unanimous vote of the select board back in the early time. Of course, we didn't have a vaccine at that time, and there were, the dynamics were different. But the action taken by the Brattleboro Select Board initially was a unanimous action. Then the board rescinded that in June 2021. Of course, it would have been discontinued anyway when the executive order ended. But then in August, as we were seeing the Delta variant happen and the spiking of cases, that's when the matter came back before the select board to renew this in Brattleboro and try to travel under Title 18. And at that time, after a good long discussion and some community input, there was a 4-to-1 vote to move forward with it. I have no way of knowing what the next vote on this matter might be. So I'm trying to speak, sort of referencing the history here in Brattleboro, but my, particular advice to you that I'm offering this morning is my own as town manager and as a Vermonter. I think that the urgency of this matter makes the parts that we've already had some substantial discussion about and good guidance from Tucker about regarding using the word rule and waiving the some of the requirements related to an ordinance for those municipalities who choose to do an ordinance is really important, so that once you have acted, we in the municipal realm can act as quickly as possible to address this. And so I don't believe that it's necessary to have an enforcement and penalty requirement. I know that there are going to be locations around the state where people think that's important, that there be, both the clear setting of policy and some enforcement incentive for people to comply with that policy. From our perspective and the way that we've addressed this in Brattleboro, we've been really clear in our terminology that this is about creating a standardized expectation in the community. And it is not about, fining people who don't comply. So we have had some follow-up communication in the past with folks who were not complying, but without an enforcement mechanism. For us, the moving nimbly with a rule adopted by resolution to create consistent messaging was important, and we didn't feel like an ordinance was required. The 30-day renewal portion of this, it's an inconvenience, but understanding the rationale behind it, we certainly agree that there needs to be a rational basis for action. I believe that municipalities can be trusted to recognize when is the appropriate time to rescind the action if the numbers get a lot better and circumstances enable us to do that. So I don't think that it really is necessary for there to have to be a 30-day, every 30 days update. But I do understand the way that's being asked for, consistent with the governor's own actions throughout COVID, and as a means by making sure that the governing bodies in every municipality do pay attention to changes in the circumstances. Frankly, it's one of those things where we might not agree that it's necessary, but it's easy to comply with. And so, we've got no objection to the 30-day clause. I think it is important, and we appreciate how it's currently framed, that this focus on indoor public spaces. One of the things, again, in trying to calibrate it properly so that we do, in fact, follow good science and increase the protection of public health, is to make sure we don't overreach. And so by making sure that it's indoor and by making sure that it's public spaces, means, there can be no misconstruing that it would be, people having to put on masks in their home or, other kinds of things that folks might find objectionable that might create more polarization around this issue rather than, better standards of expectations of how we behave when we're in public settings with each other. So, so we think that the indoor public spaces part of this is very important. And the last thing I've got to offer is just a nuance, but maybe an important one. And I guess here, in addition to floating it as just something to make sure that you give some thought to of how you think it ought to be calibrated, I guess I also may look to Tucker for some guidance, either, at your discretion now or after you've taken action, when Brattleboro looks to follow up and act in an appropriate manner consistent with your intent. We chose to focus on people who have control over facilities where the public is invited, rather than imposing a mandate on individuals. And we did that intentionally because what we were applying was the experience that we've had as an entity that's responsible for some public spaces, some indoor public spaces, that we wanted to extend that out to everybody else in the community that's responsible for an indoor public space, whether that's a retail shop or an office space or other facilities where a public or private entity, schools accepted, understanding the exemption that's in this bill, but anybody else who's responsible for a facility where the public comes together indoors, the operator of the facility would have responsibility under our rule, as we had adopted it previously, to require that people in those spaces be wearing face coverings. I'm going to say, my prejudice, obviously, because we've chosen to word it that way multiple times, is that is an approach that enables follow-up communication to be facilitated, because we can go to building operators easier than we can deal with every instance of somebody saying somebody's not wearing a mask. So I think in terms of, again, just sort of maintaining a consistency in both messaging and behavior, that I prefer our focus on the entities that are responsible for those spaces. But I understand that, this is drafted in a way that speaks to individual conduct, and that there are many ways in which throughout COVID, the guidance and the rules that have come out from various entities have spoken to what each of us as an individual has as an obligation. I don't have a strong feeling about that, but I've offered to you my perspective about why I think speaking to the folks who are operating these institutions or these facilities might be a preferred approach. I don't know Tucker's perspective about how that comports with, the authority to take these actions. And so I'm interested to know that at some point.
May I ask you a question about that, Peter?
Yes.
So I guess I understand, because are you saying that it is up to the operator of a facility where the public is invited, say Hannaford's grocery store?
Yep.
To determine whether they want to require masks or not, or what is their responsibility and authority here that you're talking about?
So of course, right now it is up to them, right? Because there isn't a rule that's imposed on anybody. What we would like to do is to be able to say to Hannaford and every other operator of such facilities, it is your obligation to have a rule that people who come through your doors are wearing face coverings. And the reason we do that is I think it gets us to the same end point, but it gets us there where if there is a particular location where people are seeing a pattern of folks not complying with this, we can then follow up with the operator of that facility and remind them of their obligation to enforce the town's local rule. This worked really well for us during the longer period of time after the May 2020 adoption, and we had 13 months of having a mask mandate in effect in Brattleboro. One of the original motivators for adopting it was the fact that business owners were concerned that being left to make their own rules left them kind of afloat and having to deal with, all the strong emotions people have around wearing and not wearing and being required to wear and so on. And so we were being asked by the business community to adopt a standard expectation for Brattleboro. We did that. And then we found it actually really useful in the follow-up over the many months when there were situations that arose where concerns were expressed to us. We were able to follow up with the folks who operate the particular facility where something had been observed, rather than having to try to find an individual person or deal with it in a way that really is impractical.
So this would just do something like say, because you're the operator of the facility, you have to put up that little sign on your door that says, there is a mask mandate in Brattleboro. We are following that, so it isn't, I see, yeah, because I remember seeing them all over town.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we actually created a sign so that there was a standard image of this requirement so that the store owners were able to say, you have to put a mask on when you come in here. The town requires it.
Yeah, okay. I get that. Tucker, is there?
Peter, I believe that as drafted, this would allow your municipality to adopt a rule that would not only cover those places, but really what you're getting at is around compliance and enforcement, which is the back end of specifically that ordinance adoption process. And under both 24 VSA 1974 and 1974A, covering both the criminal penalties and the civil penalties, depending on what the municipality chooses for its ordinance, that there could be enforcement on a person, which includes business entities, for violation. Now, it's going to depend on how the rule is written as to whether it can be enforced. But again, because this is a somewhat general delegation to the municipalities, the responsibility to craft the rule to cover that is going to be put on you. This likely does incorporate your concern and your model of regulation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thank you. Any questions for Peter? Yes, Senator Hinsdale.
Peter, since you last took a vote on this issue, do you believe that it's become more controversial and you're more likely to see increased political activity, protest, or any kind of conflict arise at the meeting where you discussed taking this vote?
Senator, I learned a long time ago to try not to predict what's going to happen at a select board meeting.
Here.
But having said that, I think there's a reasonable concern here. You know, we've seen protests in our community in the last month or 6 weeks that were new for us here, anti-vaccination and anti-mask wearing, street corner kinds of demonstrations. Whether or not we would end up having a long and more contentious conversation at the select board level, I don't know. Even in the prior times when the board has considered this, there's been a mix of opinions about whether or not it would be a good idea to have a town mandate. So, I think that's a necessary part of the process. I don't think that your policymaking and then our select board's policymaking should be driven by the concern that there might be more contentiousness, but rather by like what you're hearing in the substance of what people are saying in those conflicts.
Thank you. So, Peter, you're welcome to stay with us. Clearly, we'd love to have you stay with us. And should we jump to Carl?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me begin by giving my standard disclaimer when I speak before legislators, and that is that I have spent enough time with Quakers that I have adopted the Quaker witness of not using people's titles on the grounds that we are all equal in the eyes of God. However, I have full respect for everyone here, and I will convey that respect when referring to individual people by using their full names rather than the title and their last name, if that's all right with you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting me follow Peter, because 2 reasons. One, he has very clearly stated the process for Brattleboro, and I can just take care of large chunks of my testimony by saying, I agree with everything that he said. We've gone through a similar process in East Montpelier. In fact, we have literally copied the texts that Brattleboro considered and passed, both the mask mandate that they passed that was vetoed by the governor and by Governor Phil Scott, and also by the resolution. We took that and worked with that and modified it in our own way. I am here not to oppose this bill. In fact, given the current political circumstances, I support this bill. However, I see it as neither necessary nor sufficient for.
You are fading. I don't know if it's me or if it's.
Okay.
It's not you, Jeanette. He seems to have covered his microphone.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see the bill as, I support this bill in the current political circumstances. However, given the state of COVID right now, I see the bill as neither necessary nor sufficient as a response. And I will explain that after I say a few more details about the process that East Montpelier went through. And I am the vice chair of the select board in East Montpelier. And after Brattleboro had its meeting where it adopted both its resolution and its mandate, then at my request, the East Montpelier Select Board called a special meeting, warned 7 days in advance, because we thought we wanted that amount of time to be able to poll both businesses and residents of East Montpelier about the advisability of doing something like what Brattleboro did. During the time between when we decided to have that special meeting and we actually held it 1 week later, that's when the dynamic between Brattleboro and the governor's office played out, when Phil Scott made it clear that he had taken upon himself the powers of the health commissioner under Title 18 to approve or disapprove of local health rules, and that he was going to veto or at least not affirm the rule that came out of Brattleboro. So that we didn't know about that conflict between his office and him and the municipalities at the time that we scheduled our meeting, and that informed the discussion that we had with our residents and with our business owners. I asked on Front Porch Forum for input, and we got more input on this issue than almost any other issue that I've seen on my 10 years on the select board. And by almost a 2-to-1 margin, townspeople were in favor of a mask mandate in local stores and places open to the public. Business owners that we talked to ran the gamut from, we're going to do this anyway, but we would really like the town to go first so we can point to the town, to we don't care either way, to no, we don't think it's necessary. And look, the governor dropped the mask mandate months ago, so we don't want to have it again, and we think it will lead to conflict. So given that we'd already heard from Phil Scott that he would veto any mandate that we put into place, and that we heard, even though we had strong support from our residents for a mask mandate on public indoor places, we did not want to create the conflicts with our businesses in vain, knowing that it wouldn't go anywhere. So we did not pass a mandate to see it shot down. Rather, we simply went ahead and massaged the resolution, watered it down even. We encouraged businesses to encourage members of the public to wear masks. So that's our history. I said that this bill is neither necessary nor sufficient. Let me explain that. People here have already talked about how this bill is not necessary. Jay Johnson and Tucker Anderson, I believe, have both pointed out that under Title 18, local boards of health, which in East Montpelier, the select board acts as the Board of Health, local boards of health have the authority to pass rules to mitigate public health hazards. And that was the authority that Brattleboro used. That's the authority that we had envisioned using in East Montpelier. The health commissioner needs to approve those. And then the governor has said, I'm going to act as health commissioner for COVID-related rules like this. This whole special session is unnecessary. You could accomplish exactly the same thing if Phil Scott were to say, I will, acting as health commissioner, approve any mask rules that meet these criteria. And he could even say, I will do it on the condition that they need to be renewed every 30 days, on the condition that they not last beyond April 30th, 2022. So it's not necessary. And in fact, I want to specifically address Allison Clarkson's questions about whether this bill would speed things up. Under my interpretation, no. The select board could right now, under Title 18, pass a rule that then could be sent to the health commissioner, the governor's office, and the next day they could sign off on it, and we would have our rule in place. So I think that this would not speed up anything. And do you want me to pause now for the question or response?
If that's okay with you.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Allison?
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. The problem is it's a little catch-22 at the moment, because at the moment, the governor has already not allowed that. So I think the governor, so yes, you're right. Absolutely. The governor has the authority now. We all wish he'd exercise it.
Right.
We're disappointed he's not. However, it seems willing now with this bill to allow towns to exercise their authority, which at the moment still requires his okay. And it's a catch-22. Until we do this bill, you're not going to get that okay. So right. I think, while I agree with you, I wish this bill wasn't necessary. I think given the governor's position, the bill is necessary for us to pass these in these jurisdictions that would like to enact them.
I agree 100%, and that's why I said that under the current political circumstances that I support this bill. In fact, I smiled to myself a little bit earlier when Jeanette White was trying to describe exactly what this bill was doing in terms of the legislature asking the governor to sign a bill to allow towns to do. It reminded me of an April Fool's Day show I did on WDEV in a radio program that one of your committee members is very familiar with some years ago, where I created this fictional substance called Lorac that was supposedly illegal in Vermont. And there was a resolution being debated in the legislature to ask Congress to urge the state of Vermont to legalize Lorac. I mean, it's this Rube Goldberg situation where we could just go forward, as you said, we could just go forward with a different governor in place, or the same governor with a different mindset about this in place to respond to COVID. So that's why it's not necessary. It's not sufficient.
Can I just interrupt 1 second? I think Keisha had a question.
Yes, thank you.
On that
you
also.
can finish your thought. You can finish your thought, Carl.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. The bill is not sufficient because I'm hearkening back to 2020 and the first part of this year, when we in Vermont were all on the same page about how to respond to COVID. Regardless of partisan lines, then we were able to say, this is a serious problem. We're going to work together and we're going to do what's necessary, be it closing down, be it restrictions on getting together. I mean, there was one thing about restrictions on walking outside with people that lasted about a week and didn't get much consensus. But for the most part, we were all on the same page. At this point, given that Phil Scott says, I don't think a mandate's important, I think we can accomplish this just by everybody urging people to wear masks and getting more vaccines into people's arms. Then I don't think even if this passes, we will be in the same state that we were 6 months ago, that there will be this conflict. There may be more protests. If we were to pass something under this in East Montpelier, there may be stories saying, no, we aren't going to enforce this in a way that they wouldn't have done 6 months ago, 8 months ago, last year. So that's regrettable. I don't know that there's anything that this city can, that this committee rather can do about it. And I want to quickly address The 30-day issue and the April 30th issue, I agree with Peter that that 30 days is not a problem. Our select board meets almost without exception, I think, twice a month or more. And we have a standing item on our agenda about COVID management. I think now it might be phrased in terms of about the town office, but it could be about COVID management in town in general. So 30 days is not an issue. More problematic from my perspective is the April 30th sunset at all, because as you are all well aware, under normal circumstances, that is when the legislature adjourns. What happens if we have a spike in COVID cases again? Well, at that time, or in May or in July or August of next year, does the legislature need to come back for another special session to put the law in place again? I think that April 30th date is problematic. So let me stop there. Thank you for your time.
So I just want to, last year, I'm losing my years now, but when we left in March, we put together a bill that would have, were there another spike or emergency, or we needed to act quickly, we had a bill that said, if this is the case, then this can automatically go into effect again. And that might be something that we would consider, not in this bill, but in, I think we called it a preparedness bill, that we needed to be prepared around open meetings, public records, all of those kinds of things. And this might be something that we, when we go back in January, that we can consider, is this something that, if we see that happening again, is this something that could immediately be enacted? So that's a good suggestion. I think I'm adding that to my list for January.
If you're bringing up the list for January, thank you. May I make one more comment related to that?
Sure.
And that is that I would like to see the committee consider whether in Title 18, Section 613, where it describes the powers of the local Board of Health and says that the rules by the Board of Health need to be approved by the commissioner. I don't know under what legal authority Phil Scott has taken upon himself the role of the commissioner. Perhaps he has it in some way that I'm not aware of, but it doesn't seem to be the intent of the statute. And I'm wondering if the committee would consider suggesting or passing out of the committee a bill that would amend that to specify that it must be the commissioner who makes that determination and no one else. And the reason I'm suggesting that is because I think it, I think of the Challenger, the shuttle Challenger disaster, where Morton Thiokol engineers were advising, given how cold it got that morning in Cape Canaveral, that the O-ring may not be able to withstand the temperatures of a launch. And they recommended, no, let's not go ahead and have a launch. Morton Thiokol executives brought the top engineer in for a conference and said, okay, well, you put yourself in our shoes, say that you're responsible for the future of the company. What would you say then? And when he put himself in their shoes, he said, okay, I see the trade-offs, go ahead and have the launch. I think it's important that the person whose explicit job description has to do with public health be the person making the calls on public health ordinances or rules, made by local public health boards, and not somebody who has a much broader mandate.
On the list to look at.
Thank you.
Keisha?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Carl. And I could ask this of Peter and maybe Karen even as well, but so I was just in Berlin, Germany. I'm in Brussels now. They are also facing an increasing case count in Germany, very similar to ours, high vaccination rate, and trying to figure out what's happening here. They do have an indoor masking policy that you have to show your vaccination card many places to access them. They also have testing everywhere. And one of the issues that they may have faced is a few weeks before their cases started spiking again, to incentivize vaccines, they tried to limit access to testing for those who were not vaccinated in a sort of push. to get them vaccinated, because it's expensive to help people, who are not vaccinated still access testing consistently. They have since reversed that policy, but it did still make me wonder how available testing is in your communities and how much you'd like to help with that further, and what resources would need to be made available for you to feel like your constituents and your community members have the best access to rapid testing that they need to keep themselves and their communities safe.
That is kind of a general question, and we can do that. I don't think that in this bill we would address it, but we can have a little discussion on it if we want. We want to make sure we give Karen time to talk about the bill itself. But if either of you would like to, any of you would like to comment on that, that's fine.
I would only speak for myself. I haven't heard from my constituents about the testing issue. I have only once gone in for a PCR test, and that was about a week and a half ago when I had my first cold since the beginning of the pandemic. And I was able to schedule a test at the testing site in Berlin through the state online portal. Was it the same day or the very next day? If it was in the evening that I was doing it. And they told me it would be 2 to 3 days before I got my test results. It was less than 24 hours before I got my test results. One of the attractiveness of the rapid antigen tests is that it can, as I understand it, it can show whether someone is actually contagious. It's not as good as a PCR test is at showing whether you had the virus 2 weeks ago. But what's really important is whether you have the virus right now at levels that would make you contagious. And if we had sufficient numbers of inexpensive rapid antigen tests that could show contagiousness, then maybe we could add those to our tools to keeping ourselves safe. But since we don't, we haven't even had that conversation.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I'll just add that we've not experienced, with any of the town employees. I haven't personally, anecdotally, nor have we received complaints from folks in the community. There seems to be plenty of availability, whether it's a vaccine that you need or testing that you need, between the official Department of Health sites and then the variety of other facilities that are offering that. There seems to be plenty of it. I think masks are the thing we're worried about, because notwithstanding the access to testing and vaccines, we see the numbers still going up.
Thank you. Karen, if you want to respond to that, and then if you want to also respond to the bill, that would be great.
Thank you. So I would just say with respect to that there are pockets around the state where testing is not readily available. The Mad River Valley's been talking about it a little bit in their community newspaper. So there are places where you have to drive for tests, or get someone to take you for a test. But in Berlin, for instance, and in those places, it is easy to get the test. So there is some variation around the state with respect to that. So I want to echo the appreciation that Carl and Peter expressed about your taking up this legislation. We're very appreciative of your efforts and of the willingness of the governor to put forward this proposal. I would strongly urge the committee to focus not necessarily on the way the legislation came about, but rather on the rising case numbers in Vermont and the high transmission rate. We had 517 cases yesterday. It looks on the Department of Health website like there's 461 cases today. The transmission rate is much higher than it was back in August when Brattleboro made their request. It's 4.2% today. And parenthetically, I would just say that the Department of Health website does include a town by town rolling 2-week average that you can look at. There's a map, you can click on your town and see what the case numbers have been in that community. So there is that bit of information. And then, of course, the daily case counts and county-wide data. So I did want to essentially, because everything's been said already, strongly urge you to adopt the legislation. The version that's before you here, thank you, Tucker, has I think will be very workable for local governments. Our ideal would be that there not be a 30-day requirement to renew the resolution or the rule. At the local level, we think, as Peter mentioned, that towns have the capacity to make a determination about when the science shows that caseloads are going down, that maybe the imminent danger has passed. But it's not a crucial issue for us. Towns can, if need be, renew the rule on a 30-day basis. We are appreciative that there is some leeway with respect to what requiring individuals would mean, and to making it clear that any rule or resolution is not subject to petition from 5% of the population. So I did send to you the initial letter to the editor that I wrote to Vermont Digger, just so that you have that in your background. We suggested in that letter that the administration could grant local officials the authority to impose mask mandates when COVID transmission and caseloads in their communities warrant additional measures to assure public safety. I also, because I've been getting quite a few questions about it, I sent you some sort of general masking mandate information. The language of Title 18, Section 613, which we've been talking about, that allows towns to adopt health orders subject to the approval of the Commissioner of the Department of Health. Also, the language of the 3 addendums from 2020, where towns were authorized to enact stricter requirements than the governor's executive order. And then just in case you're interested, I found it fairly interesting. In Nevada, they've got a mask mandate that sort of fluctuates based on the case levels in particular county. So it's automatic. If your case levels go up, the mask mandate is imposed. If the case levels go down, the mask mandate is lifted. And then states with mask mandates in place. And then AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, actually has a state-by-state list of masking requirements. And I put the links in for that as well. So in summary, I would just say we're in a situation of increasing cases. You know that Senator Clarkson expressed very well that the public health risk here. We're heading into the holidays. We know there's going to be more cases. We think that towns need the opportunity to actually discuss the subject and make the determination whether or not they think it's appropriate in their community to impose masking requirements. And right now, as you've heard from both Brattleboro and East Montpelier, you really can't have that conversation because you can't go anywhere with it. So we would strongly urge your support of the legislation. And I'm happy to take questions if people have them.
Senator Colomar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Karen. I want to go on record as saying that whenever possible, I do support the efforts of the league. I think there have been occasions when we don't see the same result eye to eye, but that's okay. I think that's kind of like what we do up here. But I do have great respect for the work that you do. I'd like to ask, what were the results of a poll or any survey that you might have done to get input back from the legislative bodies of all the municipalities?
So we wrote, I'm going to be perfectly frank, Senator, we wrote the letter to the editor. We didn't really expect anything to come of it. And now we have this huge conversation going on. We did talk to a number of municipalities that we knew had expressed interest in masking requirements back in the spring or in August. And so we've heard from, I'm not going to recall all of them that written down, but Burlington, Brattleboro, clearly, Bennington, Windsor, potentially, Sunderland, possibly, and East Montpelier, of course, and a couple of other municipalities that they do want to be able to have the conversation. And really what you're doing here is you're providing the authority to have that conversation and make the decision at the community level. We've not heard from everybody, and we haven't asked everybody at this point in time.
Okay. I have heard from at least 2 municipalities who are opposed to this, who are against it. I think for many of the reasons that Peter mentioned, kind of puts them in the firefight, if you will, about whether or not to adopt this. So I just wanted to see whether the overwhelming response was favorable or not. But from what you're saying, you only talked to about 7 or 8 municipalities that expressed interest, and the great majority of them haven't weighed in one way or the other. Am I saying that correctly?
We talked to more municipalities than actually have said that, yes, they would like the authority. I mean, we didn't get responses from some people, and which is actually not unusual. So what I would say in response to that, Senator, is that the town doesn't have to take up the issue. This is permissive. And if I heard from Mayor Allaire that he would not support a masking mandate in Rutland City. So Rutland City would not need to take up the issue if that's the opinion in amongst the city council and the mayor there.
Actually, he wasn't one that I ever heard from one way or the other, so, but I appreciate that. The other question I had, some seem very troubled by the issue of enforcement. If a municipality has no local police department, how will this be enforced? And will you be providing guidance to the communities that don't have enforcement agencies?
So actually, thank you for that question. Reminds me that we've been talking with our municipal assistant center, our attorneys on staff, and they are preparing frequently asked questions document that will be posted on our website and sent out to towns should you pass this legislation. We're also going to be working on a model resolution or rule that towns could take up and tailored to their particular circumstances, but gives them something to start with. I think that most towns would not actually move to enforce the provisions of the mask mandate, and for the reasons that Peter described. What you really want is to have a standard and consistent messaging in the community about the need to wear masks. And a lot of businesses, I think in the past, they welcomed the fact that a town put that requirement in place, and they could say to their to people who come into their place of business that it's not us that are putting that requirement on you, it's the town. And it sort of gets them out of a sometimes difficult conversation on the spot.
Okay, again, I appreciate all the work that you do. The league is doing doing some great work, and I appreciate your testimony. Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you.
Senator Clarkson.
Well, yeah, Karen, I'm sorry in a way that you haven't had a chance to poll everybody. A number of my Windsor County District towns are really dreading this. I know there are some that have been supportive, and I have the two of the six I know about, two would, feel this is permissive and that they can deal with it. There are a number of towns who are afraid that it's going to be incredibly rancorous and divisive, whether they choose to take it up or not, that it will be pressed on them. So I am, I think all of us are very concerned about our smaller towns where this may actually just be more divisive. And I would hope that you would provide, anyway, I think that is a concern of many of the towns who are exhausted already. And they feel exactly what you just said about businesses feeling like towns give them cover. I think towns feel they wish the governor was giving them cover and that the state was doing this as a united Vermont rather than a scattershot, to use the governor's word about Brattleboro, instead to rely on this scattershot approach.
Senator, we agree with you that it would be a lot easier if there was a statewide mandate. It would also be easier if the governor used his authority or the commissioner of health and allowed towns to adopt those requirements without going through a legislative process. But those things aren't going to happen. And so we are where we are. And in the current circumstance, we support and think it would be helpful, more helpful than not, to give towns this authority.
And if I may, Madam Chair, just to follow up, I agree, which is why, I think particularly with turning this into a rule opportunity and speeding up this process, it really will help us save lives in some of our larger jurisdictions. And that is really the main reason I'm supporting this, is that we are the tool in our toolbox, which we know is a possibility now, will hopefully save lives and be speedily enacted by several of our larger jurisdictions.
So
I think just to add to that, we think that especially with the holidays coming up, a lot of the towns that have large influxes of visitors might be interested in making it clear to everybody who's coming into town what the requirements are.
So I will say that if I understand this right, that and Carl talked about this and about that we wouldn't be necessarily doing this if the governor would just say, I will give approval. But that even if the governor said, I will give approval to any town that does it, wouldn't diminish the fear from townspeople that that it'll be rancorous in their town. Because if the governor said that, they still would each have to have the debate and the discussion. So that our legislation doesn't create more rancor within towns than just the governor's approval would. The only thing that would lessen that rancor is a statewide mandate, which we're not going to have. And so I think we're in the best position. And I will say that in my county, we have a number of small towns that don't really have those public places or those centers. They're not, I can't imagine that there's going to be pressure on them to take this up, because I hate to say this, but there's no place to have this mandate. The places that are going to want to have this in our community, if they want to even do it, are the larger places: Bellows Falls, Brattleboro, Wilmington. Forgot about Wilmington. Isn't in my district, but it is in our county. perhaps Newfane. I mean, those are the places that are going to have the discussion, I would think. But in any case, even if we ask the governor to just give the permission so that we didn't have to have this legislation and this special session, it wouldn't diminish the rancor in the towns because they'd still have to have the conversation. So,
And if I may just add to that, not to discount the pressure that might be visited on the select board, but local governing officials are used to difficult conversations. That's part of what governance is. And so, you know, it's not easy sometimes, but that's how local officials govern. And you too, you have to face those difficult conversations.
I agree with you. I would say that probably being on a local select board, having been there, is a more personal rancorous debate than being in the legislature, because you are making decisions for your very, very neighbors. And you're right, they are used to it, and many conversations are become quite personal at the local level as opposed to at the state level. So I think it's almost a harder decision or conversation. But Carl?
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment that that we could have these conversations at the local level. If we want to avoid rancor at the local level, we could get rid of town government altogether, let everything be done through the state. But I don't think we want to go that way. Having said that, I will give a shout out to the people of East Montpelier. There were strong opinions on both sides when residents weighed in, a 2-to-1 margin in favor of a mask mandate in public places. And all of those opinions were expressed very respectfully. And many of them were deeply grounded in data or philosophy. So that was refreshing. On the subject of the statewide mandate, here's another suggestion for you to possibly look at in January. I've heard from Phil Scott in these weekly press conferences that he sees that a statewide mandate would depend on him exercising the governor's emergency powers, and that he doesn't want to do that again. There's something about emergency powers that just doesn't feel right to exercise at this time. Perhaps you could consider drafting legislation similar to what you've drafted for towns, giving the governor the powers without invoking emergency powers to have a statewide mask mandate. It could have a 30-day renewal. It could sunset. It could be tied to CDC guidelines about rates of community transmission. But that would be a way to address that objection from him.
Thank you. I think that in January, there will be a number of bills, both probably before us and before Health and Welfare, and probably before many other committees that will be trying to address the COVID situation. And with that, I'm going to apologize to Senator Hinsdale and Katie McClin, but we are not going to go through the bill that you have put before us because it is not within our jurisdiction, and it is not this narrow bill that we're dealing with here and have crafted. And it's much more appropriate for Health and Welfare to take it up. And in my opinion, it's more appropriate to take it up in January. So I do apologize, but I don't think we can get into that. So Senator Hinsdale.
Well, I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I'd still like, for the record, to explain my position and consider my options from there, given that I'm hearing from the chair that she will not entertain consideration of a bill that would use CDC guidelines to implement a mask requirement in counties that have high transmission. That's what the amendment that I have drafted would do. I personally, and with my conscience and my constituency, deeply disagree that we can wait until January on these matters. And I would love to see our Health and Welfare Committee take this up. That's why I talked to the chairwoman of the Health and Welfare Committee yesterday, who seemed quite open to it. I don't want to put words in her mouth about consideration at this time, but it was certainly my intention to have this considered in Health and Welfare. I don't think this is necessarily a local government issue that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a public health issue. And so, you know, I have no choice but to rescind consideration at this point of that and consider my options from there. But I believe in the precautionary principle. I believe that when it comes to public health matters, we should be doing what we believe is right based on existing CDC guidelines to keep people safe, and that erring on the side of precaution is what we're here to do. And we can then figure out in January if we have, you know, necessarily gone too far on our public health requirements and what we've implemented. But if it saves lives between now and January, I believe it's worth considering. And I believe when we come back in January, I don't know how quickly we can expedite that work. We're going into the holiday season. It's going to be a very high transmission time, and people are going to be in grocery stores. People are going to be out. I think this is the right time to have a masking requirement that is county by county, not town by town. So I just want to register that concern. I have an additional amendment that I worked on with Tucker and Katie as we were talking, because I heard Karen, I heard Peter, I heard others. I looked with, you know, the lens of a millennial at the healthvermont.gov website. There's a map that has the case count in each town. It's a week old by the time that you're looking at the information. And there's separate information where you can find county transmission rates. And it's not necessarily, you know, illustrated the way the CDC does, with making it very clear it's in red. This is a high transmission county. You know, this is what CDC guidance is for this county. So Tucker and Katie, I think, have drafted a very elegant amendment that I would ask the committee to consider, that requires that the Department of Health post daily town information with the county transmission information alongside it, and CDC guidelines for that level of county transmission. And I've asked the committee consider it, and I can forward it to you and have either Tucker or Katie walk us through it.
So yeah, we could walk through that. I do have some questions about that, and I think we would have to take testimony from the Department of Health, I believe, around
I think we should anyway.
No, because we're not dealing with the health we're not dealing with the health issue here. I mean, we're dealing with a very narrow bill, and if this is requiring daily figures, I guess it would be DFR that I would be interested in, because I heard yesterday when they were talking about how the numbers are put forward, that there's a lag, that there's that the daily numbers aren't really necessarily the daily numbers. And so I think that, I mean, we can hear what this says, but if we were going to do this, I think we would need to have some information from DFR about how they post those and how they, what daily transmission rates mean. When Mike Pichek was talking yesterday, it sounded very complicated about how the numbers, when they receive the numbers, when towns report the numbers, when they provide them. So I'm not sure, and Katie might have a better handle on that, but I understood it to be very complicated, and it isn't just a matter of saying, in Halifax, there were 3 cases yesterday, that there's lag. It depends on where they take the test. And so there's, it's more complicated than that. But given that, if you want to, Tucker and Katie, walk through this amendment.
Thanks, Katie.
I'd be happy to. Hello,
Thank
Katie
you.
McLinn, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I believe the amendment has already been shared with committee members. And
I don't know if that's true.
Katie, are you talking about the really long, like 3-page amendment that?
no, I'm talking about the brief amendment that Senator Hinsdale was just referencing.
It
No,
wasn't,
should I?
it wasn't emailed. Is it on our website?
Oh, okay. Would it be better if I share my screen or?
Yeah, because
Okay.
I haven't shared it yet.
and I don't use my computer while we're in committee.
Or email it to all of us, which is where we can see it better, actually, or put it on our
No,
web.
I would like you to do a screen share here so that we can see it.
Great.
Thank
I will
you.
do that. Okay, here it is. So it's a fairly short amendment, and it directs the Department of Health to post on its website and update daily the COVID-19 case rate for each town and the degree of community transmission in each county using the CDC guidelines. So, for example, the CDC tracks community transmission by county, and they give it each county a rating, high, substantial. So that is what that particular language is referring to. And then there's language that the data that's posted is to be readily available on the department's COVID dashboard and easy to navigate.
So I just have a couple questions. And I guess I would need to hear from the Department of Health about how they do this. If I live in Putney and have my test in Brattleboro, and I turn up to be positive, am I listed in Brattleboro or in Putney? And is the information available every day for every town? And if there are no cases in Putney today, do they have to put on there that there were no cases? I don't know these answers. That's why I'm asking.
Those are good questions. They're not questions that I can provide an answer on. You'd really need to hear testimony on how the numbers are calculated and how frequently towns are receiving updates and which, where a person is tested, if that is attributed to the testing site or where the person actually lives.
Well, and it isn't whether the towns are getting the information. It seems to me that it's the town that has to send the information to the Department of Health, right? Because there wouldn't be any way that the Department of Health would get the information unless it was sent to them by the town.
I'm not sure how that would work. Some of the testing is through the state. I don't know if the state would have access to the towns that each person that was tested through them would, what their results were. I'm not clear how that information is shared currently.
I'm just curious because I know I was exposed to somebody, we thought, so I had a test, but it wasn't at a state site. It was at an urgent care so I had it at the urgent care center. Now it was at my workplace. So does that get, and so I had to be tested because of work. So I guess I think this is a little more fraught than it seems on first glance, but I may be wrong. And for employers who test their employees, if their employees work in Brattleboro but live elsewhere, how does that get recorded? I think that there are a lot of issues here that we need to, and I'm not sure when we're going to do this.
Well, Madam Chair, with all due respect, I think there's complications, but I do think you're overcomplicating it. They certainly get everyone's address, their home address when they're tested. I think we'd have very skewed numbers if it was by the testing site or by the workplace. That would mean that thousands of people who work in Montpelier look like they have cases in Montpelier. I really don't think that's the case. I'm no expert.
Okay.
I think it's probably fair to say that right now there is a time lag. I think this would be asking to close the time lag, and I'll let Karen take it from here, but I do think there's a little bit of overcomplication happening.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know, because this isn't something I've ever paid attention to. So I feel very uncomfortable with it, but that's why I'm asking the questions. Karen?
Yeah, I just thought I would relay that I had a email conversation with the Commissioner of Health yesterday about data on a town level basis, and whether we could get, somebody had asked about number of hospitalizations or deaths per town, and there are HIPAA restrictions. So you can't personally identify someone. So I think that you would need to hear from the Commissioner of Health around this whole issue.
Yeah,
So-
that's true.
Okay, but we're talking about data that does exist on the website. It just doesn't exist in the time frame we're talking about. So I don't want to overcomplicate things again, that hospitalizations and deaths are not discussed in this particular provision. It's cases and transmission rate. I think death gets very personal. We don't have that many deaths, so it would be very identifying. So I just want to be clear that's not in this. This is information that's already available. It's just not very easy to navigate, and it has a week time lag.
Wouldn't it be, I'm just a little bit nervous about putting this as an amendment on this bill without being able to justify it on the floor, because we haven't taken a lot of testimony. Would it be better to just, well, I guess asking them to do
Madam
it?
Chair.
Yes, Senator Clarkson.
So, Jeanette, I think actually in some ways it will be critical to towns as they weigh this 30-day, this bill now has this 30-day provision in it. I actually think this provision really making the DOH website function in real time will be essential for our towns to actually do the work we're giving them in this rule. So I in a way, I had thought everything was in real time and updated daily. There may be some staff reasons that DOH at the moment isn't able to do it daily. It would be great to hear from them. Maybe we can adjourn and listen to them in half an hour once we get somebody on deck to testify. But I think actually, if we're going to make that 30-day thing work for the towns, this would be a very useful piece of information for towns to have to weigh their decision. In that, I just think this would be an additional tool for towns to in real time know what their case counts were.
Okay, so Karen, you have your hand up again or still? Okay. So I guess if the committee is willing, in order to look at this, I would suggest that we take a break and see if we can get somebody from DFR and Health to come in and speak to whether this is even possible to do it on the same day. I know that one of the things that Mike Pichek was talking about was that they don't get their information until a certain time, and it sounded very complicated, is all I'm saying.
I also just want to be clear, the amendment doesn't say same day information. That does sound pretty challenging, and we wouldn't want to post inaccurate information. It says update it daily. So to me, that I could go back to Ledge Council, but that's different than trying to require them, in my mind, to get same day information posted. I believe they probably need 24 hours to verify and check that it's quality information.
So are we saying they don't do that now, or are we saying it's hard to access?
All I know is the information is more than a week old on the website now.
Right, but if they're, even if they're updating daily, if the way they get their information is a week, we're still not saying that it's going to be up to date. We're saying that they need, every day they need to do something. And okay.
To Senator Clarkson's point, I just love to get them in there and see if we can close the gap. And if the language needs to be tightened, then great. But
okay,
a week old information isn't great. And I'd love to see if they can make it more current information per town's needs to assess this.
Okay, Senator Polina.
Thank you. I just want to say that I also think this is it's worth pursuing and getting some answers around this issue.
Okay.
It means we have to take a break and come back. I think it's worth it. I would venture to guess that I'm not the only one who feels that this has been an extremely frustrating process. I mean, unlike any time we've ever taken up any proposal, we're asked to do something that's affecting people's lives and livelihood, and yet we're told like we can't look at options. And I find that so frustrating that we have to presume that what the governor put on the table is the only thing possible, even though we know that there's a lot of questions about it. It's just very frustrating. I think that, my whole thing is that we should be doing what would result in the greatest positive impact on Vermonters with the minimum of friction and conflict. And I think that there are other ways to go about doing that than what's happening here. I mean, we're going to end up supporting a bill that none of us feel good about, simply because we're told that it has to be this way or no way. It's really puts us in an untenable position. So I just wanted to voice that frustration. I think it puts us in a bad place.
I agree with you, but I do not feel that we are asking to support a bill that none of us agree with. I actually agree with this bill. I think it is important to give towns the option. Would I rather go farther and have a statewide mandate? Yes. But I do not disagree with this bill itself. I think that this is anyway, so there's a huge difference there between would I go farther or do I disagree with this bill? No, I don't disagree with this bill. So
yeah, I hear you. I think it's not a question of disagreeing with the bill. It's a question of having a lot of questions about the bill and thinking we can do better. I think that the bill is good given the context that we're working in, which is we have no other options. So given the fact that there's no other options, then this is not so bad, right? Because it's this or nothing. So
okay, I'm going to call on Carl because he's got his hand up.
Yeah, thank you for considering this amendment. I think it's important to get data tied to CDC guidelines explicitly on the state website, and I think this is a good start. A couple things I would think about. I won't be sticking around for your later testimony on this, but some things you might think about asking is, are the data about towns, are they meaningfully about towns? By that, I mean, East Montpelier has at least 3 town zip codes, mailing addresses. My mailing address is in Montpelier, for example. So if I were to test positive, would I come up as a East Montpelier case or a Montpelier case? I don't know the answer to that. But more important, I think to me, is that the county level data that I would, as a municipal official, advocate for tying any policy at the municipal level to what's happening in all of Washington County rather than just East Montpelier. So please consider if you need to modify the amendment in some way, that please consider the focus on the county data.
So the question is the county data also a week behind, or is the county data more timely? And I hadn't even thought about the zip codes, because people in Dummerston and Westminster use zip codes from Putney. Dummerston does not have its own zip code. It has Putney or a Brattleboro zip code. And when you put down your address, you could write Dummerston with the either Brattleboro or Putney zip code, or you could write down Putney or Brattleboro with their zip code. So people would still not have any idea if you lived in Dummerston.
I think you're asked to give your physical address when you're tested.
I
can't remember. I've been tested so many times, but I can't remember this. But that's the reason I think we should find out.
Okay, I'm going to call the Department of Health and DFR and see if they can, send somebody over at 1 o'clock, and hopefully committee members can stay. I cannot stay past 3. I am going to tell you that right now. So can everybody rejoin us at
1.
At 1?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, good. And I'll give the Department of Health and the and DFR a call to see if they can join us. Kendall, maybe can you just suggest who might be the best person there? I don't know if Pichek and
Yes, I've started to try to track down people's availability. It would be Commissioner Pichek. His assistant is Nicholas Marino, and then the health department, Commissioner Levine, or through the secretary's office can help track folks down.
Have you actually contacted them to see if they can? I don't want to overwhelm them here. So if you have
not yet.
Okay. Would you rather I do it or you do it?
If you want to, again, it might be on a short time frame. I'm not sure what their availability is and where they are right now. So again, if you want to go ahead and reach out, and I can on my end as well, that might be best.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe getting both of you at the same time may produce the desired effect.
Kendall, I'll forward you the amendment if that's helpful.
Sure, thank you.
Okay,
The amendment is now posted on our website too.
Oh, okay. So
okay. All right, thanks. So we'll see you all at 1.
Great.